Да, се едно съм Карл Шагайс, че се смея точно. Голям смех. Okay, hi everyone, officially. Welcome to Beer.js, June 21, 2021 edition. Today I'm going to talk about technical interviewing. So this is actually a very non-technical presentation. I recently, kind of almost a year ago now, became an engineering manager. So I don't feel confident talking about code anymore. I don't understand anything. I'm just a manager. So yeah, okay. Okay, that's the internet not cooperating. Okay, here we go. Searching for a new job. The only reason for a developer to ever shave, as we know. So I guess some of you are searching for jobs. That's good to hear. Well, you're getting something out of it. But this presentation, and about me, I'm Mihail, Michael, whatever. And I am currently an engineering manager at SumUp. I enjoy a lot of sci-fi stuff, so I'm like a nerd. I'm a board game geek. I own like 200 board games at home, play regularly, and I like to juggle and do some other weird stuff. I've never watched a football match in like 5 years or 10 years, so yeah. Anyway, so this talk is not about how to search for a job. It's not about how to attract candidates if you're a company, and it's definitely not about how to negotiate your salary. This is a huge topic. Unfortunately, it has nothing to do with your technical skills, so you have to maybe practice a little bit, like playing some interesting auction games. So we're going to focus on the middle part of the interview process. So if the process starts with engagement, is the candidate interested? Is the company interested? Is there an organizational fit between the two? We move into screening, and this should probably happen automatically as much as possible. Then we have the face-to-face interviews, which actually determine whether the candidate should be offered a position, and then we move into the salary negotiation point. So obviously there is no one specific way to structure this process, and it depends on many factors, including these I've listed, like company size, the maturity of the team, the time to market, and maybe the most important, the culture of the company. I mean, it depends on how big it is, how it's disposed towards people, whether it's wants to hire junior people and grow them, or hire senior people and think that they'll do something magical about stuff. Yeah, and there are many types of interviews, and these are the ones I'm gonna kind of talk about today. Something we call system design. Then there's the type of depth of expertise. We have the coding interview. We have a bar raiser, and we have a wash-up, and it's with an asterisk because it's not technically an interview. So the candidate is not there. This happens at the end of the process, when everybody that's interviewed the candidate gathers and compares notes and talks about whether the candidate passed or not. And there are many ways to conduct each of these types of interviews. So you could give a candidate test, you can have a whiteboard interview, you can do pair coding, or you can give them a homework assignment. And we'll see how the types of interviews mix and match with the ways you can lead them. But whatever type of interview you're doing, and I don't know how many of the people in the room actually go either lead interviews or participate in the interview process in some form or fashion. 3 people? Yeah, that's okay. Okay. And you guys lead interviews or? Yeah, okay. Nice. Okay, but you've all been to an interview, right? You've all been, at least I hope so, or you came randomly. Okay, whatever. All the interviews are about one thing, and that's evidence, right? Evidence meaning things we are searching for, signals or data points about the skills and abilities of the candidate. This can be about their technical skills, their problem-solving abilities, the way they collaborate, the way they prioritize and assess the complexity of the problem, how they structure their solution. These are all signals or data points that we can collect during an interview. And there are two types of evidence. Obviously, there's bad evidence and there's good evidence. And I've listed some examples here. So at the end of the interview, if I say, I like how the candidate thinks, that's bullshit, that's meaningless, that's useless, right? The candidate has a good understanding of the subject. Thanks, Dr. Obvious. The candidate solved the problem well. What did he do specifically, right? So the underlying qualifiers do not carry actual information. They don't tell you anything about what the candidate actually did, right? So we want to write the evidence after we did do an interview or take notes during the interview in a way that allows us to capture the actual performance of the candidate during the interview. So we can say the candidate broke down the problem into XYZ specific subproblems. They suggested using a technology to solve that specific problem, right? They identified some additional concerns proactively, and they explained clearly how a specific technology actually solves that specific subproblem, right? So we can write these things down, and now we painted a picture so anybody coming in reading that kind of these notes can make an assessment. That seems like a good thing, right? A good indication of ability. So good interviewers are like detectives. They're looking for evidence, and the corollary of that is that good candidates are like sloppy criminals. They want to leave as much evidence as possible behind, right? They want to be very kind of, if there were criminals, they want to leave their fingerprints all over the place. So, and a very important part is that as the interviewer, you're not actually, during the interview, you're not a judge. You're not trying to, if you put yourself in the mindset where you say, I'm here to make a Boolean decision, yes, no, fail, pass, true, false, that prevents you from thinking about the evidence. That kind of narrows you down in that focus of, I'm here to make a yes, no decision, so I'll keep a single bit of state, and it's going to flip throughout the interview, right, like this, but then you actually don't have anything, right? You just have that piece of state, which is useless without the journey of it getting there. So you're just collecting the evidence during the interview, and then at the end, during the wash-up, you actually gather with everybody else who participated in the interview cycle. And here, it's a good maybe place to say that my experience is that the more people, I mean, the more to a certain limit, obviously, that participate in an interview or a series of interviews with a candidate, the better. I mean, if you have just one person interviewing another person, they could as well just, keep that Boolean measure, right? They don't need that much evidence. But usually you would have 1, 2, 3 people interviewing a candidate in different sessions using different techniques, complementary, hopefully, so that at the end they would make the best decision possible about that candidate. And the interviewer, you're actually responsible for enabling the candidate to present their best. It's a popular trap for young interviewers to go into an interview and say, oh, I have that very nasty problem that if I give it to them and they'll like start thinking in the wrong direction and I'll get them and they would fail, right? That's useless. That's not helping you assess whether the person is going to actually be a good part of your team, right? It's just stroking your ego, making you feel good about you knowing an obscure thing that they didn't know. And also, the corollary is, the other thing is true as well. Candidates are collecting information as well, right? If you are, the way you treat them is speaking to the company's culture to them. They're assessing the company through you. You're the representative, and you need to understand that if they have a bad experience, they might go out and say, "Oh, that company is awful. They made me, they did a very bad interview with me, and I had an awful experience." And probably but sourcing candidates is actually very hard. I mean, finding in Bulgaria, in the world, we are, for good or for worse, we are a popular kind of breed. So we're sought after, and finding the candidates is hard. And every interview is a two-way culture interview. So you're kind of in a position where you're exchanging culture between the candidate and the company. Okay, so the meat of the presentation is some bad interview practices. And bad is with an asterisk again, because these can be useful, but there are traps. There are problems that you can easily fall into when you're doing it. And that's also helpful for candidates when they see a problematic behavior on the other end. They can try and get out of the vicious cycle. They can help the interviewer actually get evidence instead of failing in a specific way. So the first one is what I call the password interview. And the idea of the password interview is that the interviewer is looking for a specific keyword or a specific technology to be mentioned, right? If I am like a big Java guy, somebody comes in and they are like, they programmed in Erlang for like 20 years, and I'm like, how would you solve this? And I'm expecting to hear Java, and they say like actor model Erlang. I'm like, no, this guy doesn't understand it. He's not going to be able to solve it. And that's just the idea is that closed-ended questions, like short questions that they're expecting, what would you use, or that expect specific type of answers. Don't allow the candidate, don't create the right atmosphere for discussion. And it can work, but you have to be careful about your biases, right? If you have some biases, you have to make sure that you're not expecting a specific answer. You are open and receptive to what the candidate is actually saying, so that you can evaluate and help them elaborate and convince you, right? As I mentioned before, you are enabling the candidate to present their best. So you're there not to say, that's not it. You're there to say, okay, help me understand how that can work. And that's not a cold interview, obviously. I'm saying the password interview, the magic trick interview, but these are just things that happen during an interview. The magic trick is a similar concept where the candidate is expected to solve a problem, a very obscure problem, in an optimal way. And we all know these. Let's say it's a very popular one. You have an array of numbers. All the numbers appear twice. Only one number appears one time. How can you solve that? How can you find the unique number in an optimal way, right? Then usually that type of problem is very useless in a company setting, right? If you're, let's say, especially because it's a Beer.js, right? Most people who write in JavaScript usually write some sort of front end or some sort of API-driven backends where they consume some data, transform it, pass it, get some inputs, do those kinds of things. They don't do deep algorithmic problem solving in JavaScript. Right? If you're doing that, maybe you need to take a step back and reevaluate. Go ahead.
Yeah, but deep algorithmic thinking might help them maybe data transformations better.
Sure. But the point is, it can work as long as it's the basis of a future discussion. I have a personal experience with this, where when I was changing jobs last time, I went to an interview for a company that was run by 5 PhD students that were doing some visualizations for genetic data, and they manipulate kind of large amounts of genetic data, and they visualize it. And they wanted somebody to build their Kubernetes infrastructure and to set the micro front-end architecture. And I failed the interview because I didn't know how to solve a linear algebra problem. I mean, it wasn't even a programming problem. I solved it in big O of n squared, right? But they said there's a linear solution. And I said, sorry, guys, I just can't figure it out right now in the 30 minutes I had. And they said, well, you're pretty, and I had another interview that was a system design interview, and I passed that, but they said, well, we are looking for somebody that really knows the math to set up our like micro front-end architecture. So, you know, it just, I mean, you have to know how to use it. I'm not saying it never works, but what's the weight of that signal within your decision matrix, right? That's the important bit here. The paper coding interview. And with the paper coding interview, the problem again comes to context, right? If you are the candidates, as I imagine you as candidates have been in this situation where you go and you're saying, okay, write that, like, you know, write binary search on paper. That should be easy enough. Write binary search on paper in Erlang. Write binary search on paper in Erlang backwards, right? I mean, like that's not the point of Japanese. That's not the point of the exercise. That just creates undue stress. If you provide the candidate with, let's say, you say, it's okay, it doesn't need to be syntactically correct. It could be just, you know, meta language, you know, I just want to see how you lay out the program, right? That's fine. But if you're expecting them to have memorized documentation and say, oh, think about it, how many, what's the order of the arguments to subctr versus substring? I don't know, I don't remember. Each time I need to use these two functions in JavaScript for string like shortening, I have to look up which was the one that takes length and which was the one that takes two indices. Can't seem to remember those. So I hope nobody was in that type of experience but it's very easy for an interviewer to use that sort of trap to reject a candidate they have a personal bias against. And it could be even a unconscious bias, right? It could be that the interviewer, like, you know, saw them, they're a redhead or something, whatever, they have the wrong type of t-shirt, they like a hip-hop t-shirt, and you're like a metal guy. So, you know, there was like something that made you want to reject them on a subconscious level. And you can justify to yourself that you used like a little trap that candidate didn't pass. Like I come up without evidence with a binary yes, no at the end. That's it. They were garbage. Why were they garbage? Well, you should have seen them. Like they didn't even know like the 17th parameter to that function by heart. Okay, so the other one that I've mentioned here is the unpaid internship type of interview. And the problem here is that the candidate is expected to commit an unreasonable amount of time from their own time, right? So that's very high opportunity cost. If I am applying to 4 companies and all 4 companies expect me to spend a week of my time full-time, you know, solving a problem or developing something for them, that's basically a month that I need to be working for free in order to get a job. And you know, some candidates might do it, right? Some companies might expect it, but usually for me, that's a sign that there might be a cultural problem in the company where people are habitually expected to work overtime, or you know, there is no balance of you know, the joke about we ask them for estimates and then treat them as deadlines, right? That's a very bad kind of idea here. So this type of thing, giving somebody homework, is very useful, but it should be definitely scoped, time boxed, and if not, it should be compensated. Right? You can go in, say, okay, we'll pay you, we'll basically hire you as an intern or like as a contractor for a week. You will not get like the maximum salary, but there should be some appreciation of the candidate's time, you know, because
well, it's the same if you take one from us to interview them. Why do you think that spending time on interviews should be compensated by the company? Well, if I interview and they spend 2 or 3 hours with you, should we both be compensated to make it?
That's mutual time. Here I'm talking about a take-home type of assignment, right? where you send me a PDF with some, like, with a thing that I should develop at home, and the thing is so big, and I should deploy it like in production, and it should look beautiful. It should like be microservice architecture. It should have like all of these things that take time and effort to build, which is going to first be thrown away because it's not a production actual issue that you're solving for the company. You're solving a baby problem, but you're using a bazooka to do it. And then you're asked to do a lot of work, for free, basically. So during an interview, 1, 2, 3, 4 hours, that's perfectly normal for both parties to agree to spend together, and that's a mutual investment. But when the investment is, I send you a document and I can send it to 1,000 people, and all of them.
The investment is not written by itself. It's written by some guy that maybe spent a week, 2 or month or 2 to make the document be great.
Sure, but he was compensated during that time. Right? Somebody paid him to do that document. The document is going to be sent out to a bunch of people, and the cost of that document is going to get, amortized over the period of time, over the period of people.
Well, it should be updated. You cannot just make PDF in 2001 and use it 20 years later.
Sure, of course, but again, I mean, it's maybe we have a cultural difference, and that's okay. Yeah, because it's again, if you're sending somebody a homework assignment and it's like you can do it reasonably well in a day or 2, that's fine. You don't need to compensate them. But if you're expecting them to do unreasonable time, right, to invest unreasonable time and effort, and that's where it's fuzzy, right? It's never like, just black and white. It's about asking the candidate maybe, hey, are you comfortable? Does that seem like a reasonable amount of work, right? And I, for example, have received assignments and I look at them and I'm like, which of these do you want me to do, right? Like, what should I focus on? What's the thing that you actually want to see, right? And then we have a conversation about the, downscoping that problem, but not all candidates feel they have, and that's a slide I have about advice for candidates. Not all candidates feel they have that leverage, that they can negotiate, hey, that seems like too much work, right? And it seems like it sounds bad, but it's actually a good thing. To me, that's a signal that the candidate understands time management and priorities, right? And that's an important thing.
There is another question from
Go ahead.
Do you think there should be a similar payment for home tasks?
Yeah, I'm talking about home tasks usually here in the context of this slide. Yeah, but again, it should be paid after a certain, if the task is big enough, right? If the task takes a day to do, or 4 hours or 6 hours, that's a reasonable amount of investment to ask the candidate to show that they're interested in the position. But if it takes a week, then it's too much.
What is the day? Because if you like to not overtime, maybe you will do it manually. I think if you do it 2 hours a day, it will take you a week.
Sure. I mean, reasonable time is like, I mean, if you can do it in a couple of hours to like 16 work hours, whatever that means, that's okay, right? It just, and again, I'm stressing the main word that's underlined here is unreasonable, right? No, it's a handshake between the interviewer or the company and the candidate. So if they are both agree that it's a reasonable amount of time, then it's reasonable. If they don't agree, then then we're in this situation. Okay, so another problem that we see is kind of the Rockstar interview, and the idea here is that the stallions, they're magnificent. The candidate is judged against an unreasonable or unreasonably high bar. Here again, I should have underlined maybe that, but the idea here is that there's a couple of different problems related to this. One is on the next slide, 10 years of experience with 1-year-old technology. That's kind of a popular thing to ask on LinkedIn, right? People who don't have the technical knowledge, just inflate the numbers. Like, oh, you want that? You told the HR like 1-year experience. They said, let's raise the bar, right? The technology didn't exist back then. What are you talking about? So for entry-level positions, for juniors, and I see that I teach some courses at university from time to time, and I see that right now for students, when I was graduating and I was getting a job, oh, you actually know the language. You actually have some pet projects that you did. You're amazing. Come on in, right? Now they have they have running production systems on their portfolio, and they're like, I don't think I qualify for that position, like for that internship. And there's an inflation of the expectation towards the candidates. Obviously, it's easier nowadays to deploy to production than it was I'm not going to say the year, but back then, it was easier for us to demonstrate that we have the
Well, from what I've seen so far, the interviews for entry-level positions are way harder compared to interviews for senior positions. I've been in an interview once before when I've been applying for a senior position, and they just asked me what were you working for, and I said a couple of points. They said, "Okay, we'll hire you."
You had an easy interview, and that's a reverse signal. As a candidate, I would be suspicious about that.
Yeah, but the question here is, I've seen this in too much companies, and maybe here we're doing it too. For entry-level positions, we are far more concerned because you cannot be sure that this guy can be curable. They can start and they can live here for 1 year or 2 years, and they can just know the language but cannot do anything professional.
So that's about
positions. The risk is bigger for hiring people because of previous work experience. Somebody goes and he worked at some company that you know, like you at least know that he can do some.
You can check the references, but he left that company. How did he leave? Why are they changing, right? I mean, I understand, and I agree to some extent. Here, I would say that the trick is, what are you testing for in the interview? Are you testing that they have experience or that they have the right attitude, right? Because these are two different things, and they're not like mutually dependent, right? You don't necessarily need the experience to have the attitude, and having the experience doesn't prove you still have the attitude.
Yeah,
right?
when you're engaging for your first job, you always don't have any experience, and people can see that from the CV. So they make much harder interview to see how you convert into the company, and I don't know how is the unreasonably high bar here. So what is the minimum content of unreasonability when the candidate is so junior that it cannot know if it's unreasonable or not?
Yeah, that's a hard thing, and I think that's more about the kind of where the company is in terms of culture and size and expectations, right? Facebook can have an unreasonably high bar towards even entry-level positions because they have 1,000 candidates and they are looking for 3 positions, right? So the churn, not the churn, but the population size that they have in their funnel is much better than if you have a startup and you're not sure whether you can even pay the salaries like 6 months down the road, but you have a bar as high as Facebook does, right? I mean, so that's maybe more about the situation of the company and the kind of outlook of the people inside than specific, kind of this is a set bar or something like that.
Yeah, okay, that's something that I would like to discuss after the presentation.
Sure.
Because
I don't
on the side of the company and not on the candidate, maybe I would like to discuss it also.
I don't pretend to have all the answers. That's just kind of an amalgamation of all the experiences I've had over, I would not say 1,000 interviews, but in kind of that range. Okay, so the other thing is during the interview, and that relates to that magic trick problem that we talked about earlier. You don't need to remind the candidate that they're not like Jeff Dean or Doug Crockford. Do you know who this guy is, Doug Crockford? You're not JavaScript developers, guys. This is Beer.js. You should know. Yeah, he's the author of the JavaScript The Good Parts book, and others. But anyway, yeah, very fun. And then the other thing is that I've heard, and this is again a topic that we can discuss, and I've seen arguments both ways, and I've done it both ways. You have to, if you're reading the CV of a candidate before the interview, you have to be very cautious about it biasing you towards something, right? If you see a very rich CV with a lot of experience, you might kind of raise the bar in your head, like, oh, I expect this guy to literally know everything, right? And so my judgment towards them is much stricter than if I'm the candidate, if I left things out of the CV, right? So now I have to think about what's enough in the CV to set enough expectations so I can jump over them, right? So it becomes a different type of game, right? But again, it's just about knowing your biases when you go into the interview. I've seen a guy that's done more than 5,000 interviews, I think much more than 5,000, who never read the CVs beforehand, and they just tried to, after the interview, guess, like, what type of positions the candidate was in. Like, that was if he could guess, then he got evidence out of the interview, right? Because he got enough predictive capability, right? That's the scientific method. Yeah. That already showed this one. And the worst type of interview is the inconclusive interview. So if you are doing an interview and you come out of it as an interviewer, and you come out of it and you don't know whether you want to hire the candidate or not, you failed completely, right? That's the worst possible outcome. And I've done that myself. And it's very easy for beginner interviewers to fall into that thing where they're not sure. Like, I don't know. Maybe they could do it, right? It's up to you when you're in that room to help the candidate convince you that they can do it, right? If they cannot do it, they'll convince you they cannot do it, right? But it's up to you to extract that evidence out of the candidate, right? If you're like trying to be too polite, right? There's also a kind of a balance here between being too polite and actually not getting what you want out of the thing. So if we're too polite and we just stare at each other like that, we come out and, well, he was very polite. We mentioned the weather in the beginning, and then nothing, right? And that doesn't work. So you have to make sure that you come out of that room with evidence, with a decision, or not with a decision necessarily, but with enough evidence that you can participate in the wash-up and you can contribute to that discussion at the end of the process. And if you waste the company's time, the candidate's time, they're not going to come back and say, well, can we do a second one? I mean, probably at some parts it works, like in some places it works, but it's usually a bad sign if that happens. Okay, so that was kind of the part about the problematic types of interviews, and maybe I should switch those, but now we get into the process of the interviewing, right? How we structure the pipeline, basically, the funnel of the interviews. So usually we start with screening, and screening is something that, and front-loading interviews. And this is something that is usually applied when there is a lot of candidates in your pipeline, right? If you're getting one candidate a month, you don't need to screen them. You can basically going a face-to-face interview directly. You don't need to send them an automated thing, right? If you're getting 1,000 candidates a day, you cannot interview them all. You need to screen, right? So it's again about applying it. I've seen companies that don't get any. I mean, we've been a company that gets one candidate a month literally, and we spend more time on developing the screening test than we would have spent on interviewing the people directly, right? So, and you're not guaranteed because these screenings do not actually never give you a positive signal. They don't tell you whether the candidate is actually going to be fit in your company. They only tell you when they're not going to fit, right? So you're just negatively screening. You're never positively screening in this automated way. Okay, so one way to do it is automated tests. So you send them something like HackerRank or something like that, and they fill it in. It could be code, it could be just like ABC, it doesn't matter. They solve that, and great, you have a filter. And that filter should be the first line of defense and should filter out the weakest candidates. And as I said, it's not actually, doesn't provide any evidence about suitability, whether the candidate actually is suitable for the position. The homework assignments, we have already had a little bit of a discussion about it. It's a great tool, and it's a great if you actually take time to review the candidate's code. And as a candidate, it also shows a lot of the company's culture when you receive feedback on your kind of project in GitHub in the same way that people in the company do it towards each other, right? If I get a code review, I participate, I'm not only writing a code and giving evidence one way, just giving some piece of code that I've written, I'm also participating in the follow-up process of participating in a code review. How well do I take criticism? If somebody is trying to bully me and tell me something false during the code review, do I kind of say, yeah, of course, sorry, I made a mistake, or I say, no, that's actually the way it should be done because I know that, right? And you stand your ground because you have like the facts on your side, right? That's a very good technique to measure the personality of the candidate, right? Whether they always agree with authority or they can question and assert their technical ability, right? Because you don't want something, you don't want somebody that, or maybe you do, but usually you wouldn't want somebody that just is a yes man and does whatever you tell them, whether or not you're right or not, right? You hire people in order for them to, give you ideas and help you fix your own misconceptions and problems. So it should not be fully automated. Read the code, give feedback, make that a thing, right? You get an early insight into the craft, the way that people work. Are they linting, right? Are they applying some other tools to make like static code analysis? How are they presenting their deliverables? Did they package it? Is it runnable in Docker? Does it have documentation? How easy is it to run it? All of these things are signals about how the candidate actually would do their job later on. And the other thing very important is whenever you give them a homework assignment, I would underscope it, so I would make it smaller and then kind of incentivize them to add something from themselves, right? To be creative, to expand on the problem that they're solving in some way.
From my experience, when you see a candidate do something for homework assignment, you should expect them that they will do it max what they did on the interview. They're usually going to one of the main hired.
Yeah,
they try to present their best during the interview, but they cannot keep it every day, 8 hours a day.
Sometimes, I don't know. I mean, I haven't had that like, I don't have the data. Okay, so then we come to the Sorry? Yeah, so we have to the system design interview, and that's one of my favorite types of interviews. The idea here is that you ask the candidate a very open-ended question like, how would you build and deploy a social media site, right? And here you're not looking for them to start writing code. They should just, and you have a script in the best scenario. You have a script about different possibilities that you present them, right? So you say, okay, they start like, I'll deploy it to Kubernetes and whatever. You have 1 week and you're working alone. Oh, okay, then I'll write it in PHP and I'll deploy it on like, so whatever, like superposting, yeah. So how do they react to the changing requirements, to the changing environment? How do they budget? Do they think about completeness? Do they budget their time? Proactively thinking about error handling, right? I'm expecting, especially in senior candidates, when I interview, the difference between the interview is basically nothing. Between junior, not junior, but mid-level and senior. The difference is not in the way I conduct the interview, is what I expect the candidate to mention and to elaborate on proactively. Like if the candidate says, here we have to think about failure modes, right? How does the system fail? How are we going to handle that? How are we going to scale? Like if they start thinking about these things proactively, to me, that's a good signal. I'm going to probe them further, but to me, mentioning aspects of the solution proactively is a good sign. Like going into the details, like here, let's say we're doing a social media site, right? How would you do notifications? What if one user becomes very popular, like goes viral? How do you handle that? What changes to the system that does that necessitate? Right, so you can probe about how they think about building software systems. We're long past the day where you're hiring somebody to write inside the monolith on that one model view controller, triple that, they're like just working on that. Usually people are nowadays building multiple or contributing towards multiple services across a complex infrastructure of interconnected parts, right, moving parts. Go ahead.
How do you handle CVs that are HR made, meaning have truths and pet project being past test production projects?
I mean, as I said, you might just ignore CVs in general, and that would be a good thing. If you read CVs beforehand, I suggest just picking a couple of things that you're interested in, and you don't want to weave them in if you're doing so. That goes into another topic, and that's interview structure, right? I've seen, we'll have a 3-hour interview and we'll do a bit of this now and a bit of that. That's awful, right? For the candidate, they don't have structure. You have to have managed sessions with breaks between them, right? If we do 45 minutes of system design, take a 15-minute break, and you warn the candidate. Next, you're going to depth of expertise type of interview. Where I'm going to talk about that next. And then you send them off to another person, and they'll have a different, and you can warn the other person during that time. Hey, that seemed like a weird thing. Can you probe him on that? Right? So it can have continuation there, and that gives you structure. So about the CVs, I would say ignore them or, question the candidate, but in a polite way, in a way that, hey, that seems like an interesting thing. Can you elaborate, right? So when I come in a bit to depth of expertise, that's where previous experiences. Yeah, go ahead.
But before the interview, maybe the recruiter sees the CV, sees these projects and gives back questions before.
Of course, yes. That's part of the screening as well. Yeah, that's even part of the engagement kind of portion of the process, where the recruiter on their own, especially a very knowledgeable recruiter, can kind of screen out a lot of candidates before they even hit your automated test. Okay, so system design helps you understand whether the candidate not only can build a system or knows how to build a system, but whether they can be in a team lead position, right? Whether they can manage a team, do they know how to budget people and resources and think about like a larger kind of organizational level. The caveat here is that this type of interview only confirms that somebody knows how to build a system. It doesn't confirm that they actually can build it, right? So they know in theory. In theory, I know how to get to the moon. I just need to jump real high, right? And I'll be there. But in practice, I haven't done it yet. So that's a thing to, you get out of the interview, this guy's going to solve all our problems, he knows how to do it, right? And then you hire them and they're like, yeah, we'll need like 15 architects here to work under me so they can implement my grand vision, right? That's useless. Yeah, okay, so in this type of interviews, obviously whiteboarding is a great tool where you allow the candidate to just draw system designs, like diagrams. You can even talk about the types of diagrams they're using, and that's more information, more evidence for you. Okay, the depth of expertise, and here's where questioning the CV comes in, right? So we discussed previous projects. The idea of this kind of format is to discover the limits of the candidate's knowledge and experience. So the idea is like, if they're like, okay, push them further and further. Like, okay, but how does that work? How does that work? Like, why does the register of the processor, like, does that? When is it cached, right? You can go down and up in the level of abstraction, trying to just feel out where the candidate says, I don't know. Do they try to lie? Do they try to bullshit? Do they confess, like, do they know their own limitations, right? You encourage the candidate to do self-evaluation on the projects. Could you have done it better? Why did the project, would you consider it a success or a failure? Do you have any failures that you want to share, right? I mean, because it's easy to say, oh, everything on my CV is a success, right? But that's not true, obviously. I mean, nobody, like, if it was like that, we'd all be billionaires, and like, that we never made a mistake in our career. That's bullshit. So obviously, if the candidate here, it's that you're judging not judging, but collecting evidence about their attitude, the way they think about leadership, whether they can do it or at least accept it in a specific way, and how they judge impact, right? Do they measure? Yeah, I've had that conversation with a guy at one point where, like, well, are you happy with the work you're doing? And he said, yeah, I've wrote like a million lines of code in that period. And did we deploy anything? Well, no, the users were stupid. And I'm like, yep, you're great, very senior. So that idea of like, how do we measure our successes, right? You can, and talking about previous projects and talking about experience, that all can be done in this sort of session. But again, it's not like, a lot of people do this, but they don't focus, right? A lot of times you go to a company, they do a little bit of that, a little bit of this. When you have a focused interview, when you prepare in advance your kind of ideas, what are we focusing on, what evidence are we trying to collect in this specific session, then when you come to the end, when you come to the bar laser and the wash-up, I'm just going to talk about the wash-up. When you come to the wash-up, then it's easy to actually take a decision, because all of you have collected different types of evidence. Some of it overlaps, some of it like clashes, and then you have that aggregation, and you're talking about, whether we actually want to hire this person or not, right?
Do you think it's a good idea to invite some person from the company that's not involved with the candidate, maybe more junior than them?
You might. We haven't done that. As far as I know, I haven't been on a wash-up where somebody's completely clueless, but maybe it could work. I mean, it's okay, and I don't have slides about this, but I'll talk about it a little bit afterwards, about how you actually train interviewers. and that may be part of that process. We call that shadow, right? When you shadow, you can shadow. You usually shadow throughout the cycle, right? So you start with shadowing means like I just go in the interview and I just listen, and I take notes both about the candidate and about the interviewer, right? So I kind of am trying to think about both sides of the equation. And then you start, after a couple of times shadowing, you start reverse shadowing, which is you lead the interview, but you have an experienced person with you, just monitoring your performance, helping a little bit sometimes, even on Slack. I just had that dude, cut him off. He's like rambling now. Like, just, you have to cut him off because he's not helping himself right now. He's just talking and you're not getting anything out of it. And I'm too polite to cut him off. So that was very good advice to say, thanks, that's great, let's move on, right? And it's fine in the interview. It's fine for the interviewer to say, let's move to another topic, right? That's perfectly all right. So yeah, and then after reverse shadowing, you're pretty much ready to start interviewing on your own, and then getting somebody to shadow you, and the cycle continues. Yeah, so the wash-up is where people talk about the candidate and make that decision. Before the wash-up, there is sometimes that idea, usually in larger companies, that idea of a bar raiser. And the idea, I think, originated at Amazon, and kind of very fuzzily formulated. It's the candidate should be better than 50% of the people in that position right now, right? So you want to get people that are better. If you do that, right, you're shifting the mean. If you imagine a distribution of skill like in the population, you're shifting where the mean is, right? You're making every candidate is better. Now we're climbing that. Of course, obviously, you cannot do 100% like skill, but that's a different question. But that's why it's fuzzy, right? But that's the idea, that it's a short interview. It's a way, and it happens after all the other interviews, and it's done by a very senior person who has a large view over a big part of the organization. Let's say a tribe lead, or some VP of engineering or something like that, like depending on the type of organization you're having, like department head, something like that. So they go in, or if it's a small company, maybe the CTO goes into a final session with candidates, right? And sometimes you have very strong red flags at one point of the interview process, and if you find some very, very strong red flags, you don't need to continue that, right? I mean, you can drop a candidate after the first interview and say, okay, we have enough evidence that this candidate shouldn't continue on with the process. You don't need to run the candidate through the entire pipeline and waste the CTO's time just to go through the motions. Okay, that's it. Some advice for candidates. Basically, ask clarifying questions, and these are all obvious, right? So nothing obvious. Explain your thought process, demonstrate contextual knowledge. So if you're talking about something, bring up that sounds, or that's similar to that thing. I have a little bit of experience with that semi-related thing, right? Just contextualize, right? That you know more than what's asked, right? That you have a broader understanding and appreciation of the subject matter, right? If you've studied computer science at university, you didn't study how to bang the code with a hammer. You studied how, the art of information, basically. So have that attitude, display that if you have it. Allow yourself to politely disagree, something that I've touched on, right? Sometimes that's very important. That's where the interviewers are testing you whether you can disagree or not, right? If you cannot disagree, that's a bad sign. You have to make sure that if you're right, and you disagree in a polite way. They might even try to provoke you, right? Just to see how you react. And don't hide your personality, right? I mean, that for me personally, I've learned that the hard way. First interviews, you go you're very stiff, right? And you're like, blank, hello, I'm Mr. Blank. I will do whatever you say. I don't care, whatever the company says, it's right, right? No, go in, like, juggle a little bit. I mean, I do that, like, show that you're a person and that you can contribute to the culture of the company and the team, and you're a real person, right? Don't show just that you can do like the hammer and the code. Okay, so just to reiterate real quick, good interviewers are like detectives. They're looking for evidence. Good candidates are like sloppy criminals. They leave a lot of evidence behind. And as an interviewer, you're not a judge. You're just collecting the evidence. That's it.
Okay, I was thank you for this great presentation. It's been a while since I've done one, and it's a great one.
He's now hiding his personality.
Yeah, I was wondering about those mixed interviews where you choose to use several of your employees for those interviews, and you can to what extent can you go with it? So like there was a question about can you use shadowing someone who's more junior than the hiree, or can you tell us more about this this thing?
Yeah, I mean, there's two questions. Like, there is the question of having many people in the room and how the candidate feels about just facing a group instead of and then there's the question about if there are a couple of people, are they asking different questions, and are they asking them in a way that prevents the candidate from continuing their line of thought? Are they forcing the candidate to context switch? I would say if you kind of give a warning in advance to the candidate, hey, by the way, don't worry, we're going to be like this guy in the interview. That's fine. If the candidate has a problem, they'll say, hey, I'm shy or something, and you say, don't worry about it. You have to work in a team anyway, right? I mean, if you're hiring somebody to work in the basement, like John, the guy that with the ponytail, like you have one box here, walk a kilometer in the data center, another box here, like this guy probably but usually you would work in a team anyway, so having a group shouldn't be that big of a deal, but you can warn in advance. One time I remember I went into an interview and I was waiting in the lobby of the company, and they say, just wait 5 more minutes, they're gathering. And I'm like, okay, that sounds like ominous. And I go in and it's like 7 people, and they're like, they start introducing themselves. I'm the lead of this team. 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 And I'm like, okay, that's an expensive room right here. Like, that would be an expensive hour for this company. And that's fine, right? It's if it's a useful, if you have a plan for what the interview would be like, then that's fine. In that specific interview, they were pitching me their projects. The interview wasn't, can I do the job? It was, which team would I feel best to join, right? So that worked perfectly. And I was like very pumped after that because they gave me choices as well as, context. But if you go in like 4 people and like everybody's like half asleep, half there, and you're like, somebody's asking a question, the candidate's starting thinking, you can see that you have a connection, you're getting some information, and somebody's like, but what about that thing? And they break the entire thing, right? That's awful. Yeah, it shatters. So if you manage the context, if you plan, if you have a good kind of dynamic within the group of interviewers, it's perfectly fine to have more people interview. But it's hard, maybe harder.
Question from the time machine. So what would it mean if a job interview is too easy?
Sorry, too easy.
It's too easy.
Well, it can mean a lot of things. I mean, sometimes life is easy. Sometimes it's hard. It's not every day you break your leg, and it's not every day you find like a bag of money. So I mean, you have to. I would question it. I would try to, as a candidate, I would try to find out why that happened, whether it's because the bar at the company is low, whether it's because they have enough evidence from other places, let's say the homework assignment. Like if you know somebody is good, if you've collected enough evidence and the whole team is convinced, you don't need to grill them like for 5 hours, right? You can have a quick session just confirming certain things, right? You can, and then it could be easy. But if there was no homework, as you said, like you go in, you've never seen the people, and they're like, you work there, you're good to go, right? I mean, that's maybe a bad signal about what other people would there be in that team, right? How if they didn't, like, you're perfect, obviously.
Okay.
No, but the question is, I'm obviously, I'm the best, obviously, but they always hire the best, right? So, like, are the rest as the best as me as I am, right? So it becomes that you have to question if they have a low bar, whether you want to even go there, because it might be like in Bulgarian, you would call it vajen, like just people collected, random people, like that again from Silicon Valley, like Guilfoyle, gathered the team of like the water lady, the cleaner, yeah, and there's big kids, so yeah.
Okay, so as here being a relatively small company, we doesn't have lead of that, lead of that, lead of that. But still trying to do that with more people making the interview, giving their own mindset and making the final decision easy, but making the wash up. But how do you train that people to be on the same page and not doing that in the middle of the interview? Let's do it that way. How do you achieve that?
Hard. It's hard. It's not everybody should, like, I mean, first you find people that want to do interviews, then you actually explain them what doing interviews means, right? And you kind of should have a training session. I don't know how long. I've participated in a bunch of different kind of we ran through scenarios, interviewing each other. Like, I think it was a 2-day workshop with kind of very professional guidance, right? I mean, some people from the company, but they had a bunch of experience, and they've prepared like these structures. Yeah, these structures that right now I'm telling you about them. They're not the only possible structures, obviously, and you're free to invent your own, but that invention costs effort and trial and error as well. So I mean, you occasionally, even from the best interview kind of team, you get some flukes where the interview didn't go well, because it's a personal thing. It's like theater. It's sometimes you go on stage, or you see the guy, and he's a good actor usually, but this time he was like, wasn't doing it. So there is this. It's a performance. So yeah, there's always something kind of special, like a special sauce to it. And about easy interviews, if you are the company, then you have to also question yourself, like to go back to that question. If you, as a company, the candidate goes out after like 20 minutes, and like they're like, I nailed it so hard. Like, you have to see whether you need to adjust something, like whether the question was leaked, right? Let's say they've done that. Like you have these situations where I went to a system design problem interview, and they asked me, and I said, I've done this one. Are you sure you don't want to give me another one, because I've done that specific one before? I've had time to think about it.
Why should we inform them about that?
Well, because
the 3 consecutive interviews with the same problem, with a stack where you have to find some brackets, and you have to find if the brackets are balanced. And this is very popular. The last year was very popular in the United States.
Yeah, but you go on interviews to find the quality job. You're not going just to find an arbitrary job.
Yeah, but if you have solved the problem yesterday, then they ask you the same question that the other company asked you. Then this is some. There's some.
If it's the direct problem, I mean here I specifically said system design interview where you're asked how would you build an X type of system, right? If it's a specific problem like the one with the array and you have to find the unique number if all the others are duplicates, then you just give them the optimal answer that you memorized, and that's fine. But for me it's a bad signal as a candidate that they even ask me that sort of question as a senior. Let's say if I'm applying for a senior role, right? That's not the type of question I'd expect.
Senior, you're expected to know how to design that system. It was like if you ask me how to design CMS for a forum or a database, like.
But a system design interview is based mainly on probability. How this system will perform in production, how would you do it in a restricted amount of time and money and team. It's not about I will do a database, I will do a framework that makes curious, and then I will just split some JSONs to the front end. And maybe if I'm a front end guy, I will just consume the JSONs and render some tables. It's not.
You're hired.
It's not how what you see from the candidate when you ask them design me a CMS system. If you want them to think about usability, scalability, mainly performance and scalability, and
you can focus it in different ways.
CMS system, there is some cache elsewhere, and if you know that point from a interview before that. It constraints full experience, but it's possible.
I also want to add about the interview was too easy. It's a perception which is subjective by the personality, which means that he may totally failed.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. You can come out of the interview thinking it was very easy, and the other side is like this guy.
So it's very specific by the situation.
That's a very good observation.
Yeah. Do you have any other questions?
I was wondering, for example, if there is a company that makes profit only by candidates. They're doing some tasks and they sell them,
Probably.
Maybe, but it's hard to be possible. We're working side by side with Georgi to ask the question. It was a part from our list of the internship program. And maybe he best knows that even if you have 3 or 4 or 6 months of internship and you are assigned to project, this project is not even possible to be around from the green button and what's said about being built to external clients.
But there is a task force.
Can you outsource the hiring process? So can you make profit by? Can you have a company that only does that? You don't make software, you don't do shit. You just make the interviews. Is this possible?
The hiring process is very related to the culture of the company. If you want to hire people who will relate to the culture of the company and to keep it the culture, you should hire it by yourself. You cannot outsource it just because they will hire people who they like, not you.
But you can definitely have a company that consults in interview. Like if I can charge money for you guys decide you want me to help you build your interviewing thing. We can I can get some money out of that potentially, right? I don't think I will, but it's a possibility. Definitely, it's a rich space and there is knowledge to be shared, and I'm happy to kind of share my little bit of experience with that.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a note. That's what I'm doing sometimes, just making interviews for other companies and they think it's similar to that. No, it's the same.
Yeah, there's also.
But they are making the contribute interview. I don't do that. I can say my concerns, but they do the final say. So you have a candidate. If I had that power, well, I would be the happiest man in the world.
You want to ask something?
So we should say, Spring's recruitment, they're actually like screening candidates for all the companies and depending on their feedback to the companies.
Yeah, that's that you can do. HackerRank does this, right? If you do, if you go on HackerRank and you complete some things, you can use that as initial input towards like positions.
Such an interview, and when I found out that I'm not being interviewed by the company, it was a bad sign for me. Yeah,
If you weren't told in
it was
advance,
like,
definitely.
like an arranged marriage.
Yeah.
So maybe there is a good sign if either a company uses the external provider as theirs and say this is our team and they are okay with that, or they say this external team you cannot just.
But then the question is, why wouldn't you just outsource the work? I mean, if you're outsourcing the hiring, outsource the office space.
Outsource the accounting.
Yeah, basically.
Customer engagement.
Deployment, delivery.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but but for the candidates, it's not nice. Like for me, when I found out that I'm not interviewed by the person that
He pointed to in the presentation that it's good to be you during the interviews. It's better to be directly with the company which you're going to work for, just because if it's not way of behaving yourself, after 3 or maybe 6 months, you say, I'm going to quit this company just because it sucks. Actually, the company doesn't suck, but you don't fit to the company. So it's better to see the people directly from the company, not to use outsourcing services to hire you for the company.
But if it's a tool and you go in and you know that you're using this tool specifically and that you are taking one interview and that would become you fan out, right? It would become the input for like you actually applying to 10 companies but skipping like the first step because you passed that specific interview and all the companies agreed that's a good screening, right? Companies can share that screening and then enter you in their interview process based on that screening. So go ahead.
Yeah.
But you have to know that you're doing the shared screening and you're not like lied to, that you're just applying for one company. And that's okay.
Like when you said sharing, I was wondering what you know about how companies share information about candidates with each other. Do they share?
Not as much. I found that it's a market opportunity, and there are a bunch of companies that do this. When you wanna set the salaries, right? The salary bands. When you're hiring as a company, you have some salary bands. How much are you willing to pay a candidate? And usually that's adjusted through market data, right? You adjust that based on some data. And usually what I've seen is that there are companies that sign an NDA with a lot of other companies.
They profile you and they send your profile. If one company has rejected you, maybe some other company is allowed to see this your process, your interview process, maybe.
No, I was thinking more about specifically about salary ranges that these like a consulting company collects a lot of information from different companies and then gives like a salary range for each of the companies, like outputs like a number.
But they don't share the personal performance.
No, they don't.
Usually.
Yeah. And it's like GDPR stuff.
It sounds possible.
Maybe.
Yeah, but you can put references on some people if you're asked for something that they work with. It's not something common to just someone goes to interview you and after the interview you check them and put on Facebook your experience with that candidate, giving the name and something. And that's not good.
I've seen the thing that happened when Skyscanner closed their office here, and they closed a bunch of offices and they laid out a bunch of people because of Corona and travel. And the thing that happened is that on LinkedIn they advertised the people going out, saying,
They
hey,
has also made a website with the profiles of the people with links of their LinkedIn profiles.
Most
It's
often
not
they,
okay.
it's when a positive feedback is concerned, but
Yeah.
not usually when not yes, usually, but there are some exceptions. There is some companies that do this screening. Big companies use that. When someone applies for a job in a big company, they use that also that local company screen that, and they just start bringing to previous companies and collecting some
References, yeah.
references.
That's like form, that's like database.
Yeah, it's a database. They then put their reference in their database. And after they are asking for another company thing, and they say, we have this, do you want us to bring again?
the problem with the database of that sort is that first it's hard to get context out of it, right? How do you know, like, whether the boss like hated that guy and just wrote in the database some nasty shit that wasn't true. The other thing is that a negative data point is much heavier than a positive data. Human psychology. When you hear something bad about
We
somebody,
have timeline.
yes,
So probably it is good to finish our live stream. And after that,
stop the camera, stop the
people who didn't join us in person will really be jealous.
Yes, okay. Yeah, sure,
They
sure.
will miss the discussion.
Okay, so everybody thank Michel for his great presentation and very much.